There we go. Okay. Welcome everybody to our food choices and the climate crisis Zoom presentation that we have tonight. I'm happy that you're all here and that you gave us the time to join us for the hour. Real quick, just to get started with the format of our meeting, we're going to be, I'm gonna speak for just a couple minutes, providing some context and some introductions. And then I'm going to be handing things off to our first guest speaker for the night. His name is Dr. Salish Rao, and then he will be presenting for about 20 minutes. Next, I will be introducing Mr. Glen Merzer, who will also be presenting. His presentation will be 15 minutes, and please stick around for the end of the meeting as we're going to make room for an audience Q&A right before we conclude our meeting at the mark of the hour. So I'll introduce myself to start. My name is Alexander Pavlovich, and I'm on the board of directors for Resilient Palisades, and I lead our plant-based solutions team. We are a team, one team of multiple under Resilient Palisades, focused on climate action with an emphasis on raising an awareness on the environmental benefits, the health benefits, and the ethical benefits of a plant-based diet. And our organization is, filled with neighbors, friends, and family, and we're all focused on climate action. And we're really happy to have this event for tonight. So to begin, as many of us are concerned, we are facing unprecedented threats to our environment. Human-induced climate change is widespread in every region across the globe. It's rapid and intensifying, and now some devastating impacts are now irreversible, at least in our present time frame, according to a recent report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was published in August of this year. Interestingly enough, a previous IPCC report also suggested that the largest hidden culprit of climate change is the animal agriculture industry and our food choices. So this meeting begs the important question: can we as individuals actually heal the climate in a significant way and reverse more climate disaster by changing our diets and what we put on our plates when we eat? So here to dig deeper into that question is going to be our first speaker. Let me highlight you first. Give me 1 second. Alrighty. Our first speaker tonight is going to be Dr. Salish Rao. He is a systems specialist with a PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford University. Dr. Rao worked on the internet communications infrastructure for 20 years after graduation. And during this period, he led the transformation of early analog internet connections to more robust digital connections, improving their speeds tenfold. And in 2006, Dr. Rao switched careers and became fully invested in solving the climate crisis. He became a founder and executive director of Climate Healers, which is a nonprofit dedicated to healing the Earth's climate. He is an author, and he's also the executive producer of several documentaries, just to name a few of them, being The Human Experiment, Cowspiracy, What the Health, and A Prayer for Compassion. So I hope you all enjoy Dr. Rao's talk as much as I have when I've seen them online. So welcome, and thank you, Dr. Rao.
Thank you, Alex. Let me start sharing my presentation. So I'm calling my presentation the Cow in the Room campaign at COP26, because that's what we did. So I just returned from Glasgow, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened there. COP26 is the 26th meeting of the Conference of the Parties that signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So we've been meeting for we met 26 times. This is 27 years because we didn't meet in 2020. So for 27 years, we've been meeting. And during that time, I've gone to the COP meetings 4 times. This is the 4th meeting I went to. The previous 3 meetings, I mean, I really got disillusioned after Morocco and I just stopped going. I went to the one in Durban, I went to the one in Paris, and in Paris, I couldn't even eat anything in the cafeteria. Okay, there was not a single vegan item in the cafeteria in Paris. And that was 2015. And I went and complained to the UN office, and they finally had, okay, 1 vegan item in the cafeteria from that day on. Compared to that, COP26 in Glasgow, 40% of the menu items were vegan. 60% were not. And they got a lot of flack for having 60% of the menu items being not vegan. Okay, so that is progress that we have made. But is that progress fast enough? So that's what I'm going to talk to you about. This COP was probably the most scripted and secure COP that I've ever attended. Okay, it was all the world leaders showed up. I mean, most of them actually, other than Putin and Narendra Modi, almost everyone showed up, and they even had a ring of steel to protect them from the public. And the ring of steel allowed them to go and have dinner at this museum in Glasgow. And as a result of that, we had to walk 5 miles to cross the street to get to our car. Okay, it was that bad. And all this meeting that happened, when they really didn't address anything about animal agriculture of any substance. In fact, probably the most significant agreement that came out of COP26 was the agreement to end deforestation by 2030. Now, I see it as the other way around, that they agreed to continue cutting down forests until 2030. That's what they did. Okay. And this is bad news for all of us, because if they agree to cut down, deforest for the next 9 years, we are literally going to kill almost all wild animals off. Because between 1970 and 2010, we wiped out 52% of all wild vertebrates in terms of total biomass. And if you extrapolate the rate at which we were killing wild animals, we were on track to wipe them out by 2026. That was the calculation I did in 2014. And it got confirmed, because in 2012, it became 58%. By 2016, it became 68%. So we are on track to wipe out almost 100% of wild vertebrates by 2026. And yet, these people are saying we're going to continue burning down forests until 2030. So clearly, they haven't taken the significance of what's happening on the planet into account when they came up with their agreement. So we had animals, and they tried to prevent us from floating these animals. We had 4 animals to represent the cow in the room. So we wanted them to talk about animal agriculture and address it seriously. And the 4 animals, you can see the chicken wearing a mask. So she represented pandemics. You can see this pig saying, "Thank you for not eating me." And he represents obesity and chronic diseases. The fish represents pollution and how the pollution works its way up the food chain, and we eat it and we consume these animals. And of course, the cow represents methane emissions and all environmental damage that we're causing by eating animals. And they tried to prevent us from flying these animals. In fact, they put all kinds of restrictions on us, and we finally had to find a private parking lot and float it over there. And we had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, actually 3 o'clock in the morning, and get there by 4 o'clock in the morning to do our demonstration. But over 100,000 people were in the rally, and they saw these animals. So it had an impact. It had an impact. It got on Guardian, had an article about the cow in the room. We got some mainstream publicity for it. And I held 5 press conferences within the UN talking about it. So this is how we kind of got some conversation going. Even though within COP26, within the blue zone, it was all almost entirely about fossil fuels only. And there's a problem with that. Okay, so I'm going to show why that's the case.
Methane is a greenhouse gas that causes climate change. Life on Earth is collapsing. Know where most of it comes from. Me. But it's not my fault. It's yours. To feed us, you tear down forests to create new grazing land. But we need trees to capture greenhouse gases. The climate disaster is human-made, not cow-made. But you can slow it. You can stop it. You must stop eating meat. A plant-based diet is good for all us animals and the climate. You can make a difference. Transform to a plant-based diet.
So if you notice in the clip, we make the startling claim that animal agriculture is responsible for at least 87% of greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so that is an engineering assessment that I did. And I wrote a white paper on it, position paper on it that got published in the Journal of Ecological Society. And I'm going to show you where that number comes from and explain to you why, on the one hand, it's not good news because our leaders are not talking about it. But on the other hand, it's good news because it means that we have a huge role to play in reversing climate change. Okay. So the four animals, as I said, represents the four aspects of the cow in the room. And there are more other aspects. So we're going to be bringing a turkey to talk about holidays. You know, there are other animals who can talk about other aspects of the cow in the room that we don't discuss in our culture. Now, there are two major engines of planetary destruction that we have unleashed on this planet. Okay, one is the burning machine of fossil fuels and industry, and the other is the killing machine of animal agriculture and fishing. Now, all the conversation at COP26 was about the burning machine, how to turn off the burning machine, how to reduce the burning machine, and hardly anyone talked about the killing machine. And but that is a huge mistake, and I'll show you why. So we did if you look at the analysis, the science behind it, you will notice that there are lots of environmental problems. Climate change is just one of the environmental problems. There are 9 planetary boundaries being violated, okay? There is nitrogen and phosphorus loading, for which the killing machine is the leading cause. So anything in black dots here represents the impact of the killing machine. And nitrogen and phosphorus loading are in the red zone. Climate change is still in the yellow zone, okay? So think about that. We only talk about climate change, even though it's still in the yellow zone, according to this assessment, which is about 4 years old. By now, climate change is in the red zone, by the way. Okay, so 4 years ago, they thought it was in the yellow zone. But the killing machine is the leading cause of nitrogen and phosphorus loading. It's the leading cause of every other environmental ill on this planet, except for climate change. And in fact, all the other environmental ills eventually impact biodiversity. And this is why biodiversity, which is this red thing that's sticking out on the top left, is actually 100 to 1,000 times the size of the circle. It has been cut down to show the other boundaries. Okay? It's 100 to 1,000 times the size of the circle because everything else affects biodiversity. Eventually, everything that we do kills life. And this is why the rate at which wild animals are dying, to me, is the leading indicator. And this is why I look at that as an engineer to figure out how do we solve this problem, right? Now, we are being told that the burning machine is the leading cause of climate change, and it's not the killing machine. And you can see that here too. The black dots are very small, compared to the rest. But that's miscalculation. There is misdirection going on. Public is being misled. Why? Because they are trying to frame it as a problem of the burning machine, for which you can solve it by using electric cars and solar panels, which makes you buy more things and therefore grow the economy. So you don't change anything in the current model. And that's why they are framing it this way. But it's really not true. It's not true when you take into account the opportunity cost of the land that's being used for animal agriculture. And I'll explain to you why opportunity cost is important to consider. Okay. Currently, 85% of the food we eat is already plant-based. only 15% comes from animal sources. And that 85% of the plant food comes from just 6% of the land area of the planet. To get 12% of the food from land animals, we're using 43% of the land area of the planet. Now, this is a huge problem because land stores CO2. So land actually stores 9 trillion tons of CO2 right now, vegetation and soil put together. And climate change is caused by an extra 1 trillion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. So literally, if you bring back the forest that we cut on the land that we are currently using for grazing animals, you can reverse climate change. Okay, that's a paper that we wrote in 2015, and everyone knows this now, right? It's a well-known scientific fact. So, but that land area is only providing 12% of our food. So if we all go vegan, this land can be returned back to forests. And then the amount of CO2 that you can sequester on that on an annual basis can literally reverse climate change. Okay, so, and for 3% of the food, we are destroying the entire ocean actually. Okay, and really, if we all go vegan, the ocean can be left alone, and all this land can be left alone, given back to nature. So this is like 80% of the Earth's surface can be given back to nature. And I'm sure Glen's going to talk about that. Now, the reason biodiversity is dying so fast is because only 9% of the land is original forests. Okay. And they are continuing, they have agreed to continue deforestation for another 9 years. Imagine that. So if you take the animal agricultures, if you take the opportunity cost into account, animal agriculture is responsible for at least 87% of greenhouse gas emissions. Now I'm going to show you an analogy using the bathtub that explains why opportunity cost and opportunity benefits have to be taken into account. Okay. So this is the equivalent bathtub problem for climate change. So in this equivalent problem, there's a baby in a bathtub, and the bathtub has 1,000 liters of water. That corresponds to the 1,000 gigatons of CO2 that's in the atmosphere right now from our emissions. Okay, that's the extra CO2 that we have put into the atmosphere. Now, the bathtub is being filled in with 35 liters from the burning machine faucet per minute. That corresponds to the 35 gigatons of CO2 per year that we add into the atmosphere from the burning machine. And it's getting 15 liters per minute of water from the killing machine faucet, which corresponds to the 15 gigatons of CO2 equivalent that we add from the killing machine. So if you just look at the faucets alone, you might say, oh, the burning machine is bigger, so we have to focus on the burning machine. And that's what they're doing. Okay. But it's a very simple-minded analysis because there are two other things you need to consider. First of all, the burning machine faucet is connected to the aerosols tank. So for every 1 liter per minute that you turn down the burning machine faucet, 10 liters is going to pour from the aerosols tank into the bathtub. This is the cooling effect of burning fossil fuels. This is what I call the opportunity benefit of burning fossil fuels. And I'll show you why you need to take that into account, because if you don't, you're going to die quicker, right? I'll show you that. And the killing machine faucet is connected to the drain of the bathtub. So that for every 1 liter per minute that you turn down the killing machine faucet, the drain opens up and lets 2 liters per minute flow out of the bathtub into the vegan reforestation tank. Okay. And this vegan reforestation tank corresponds to the land that can be released if we all go vegan, and that can store at least 2,000 gigatons of CO2. That's my estimate. Because we have cut half the trees on the planet just for our animal agriculture. So we did 4 animations to show what happens if we do nothing. That's the first animation. The second animation is if we just focus on the burning machine faucet and reduce it by 15 liters per minute, what happens? Which is what everybody seems to want to do. The third animation, we are going to say, we're going to turn down the killing machine faucet by 15 liters per minute and see what happens. And the fourth animation, we're going to do both. Okay. So in the first animation, the baby dies in 4 minutes. That's how fast we are on track to wipe ourselves off this planet. Okay, meaning we're going to trigger a bunch of nonlinear feedback events, and it'll be impossible to stop them once you get that point. So we are assuming that the baby will drown if the bathtub has more than 1,200 liters of water. Now you could argue, is it 1200 or 1250? Nobody really knows. All we know is that we've already triggered a whole bunch of nonlinear feedback events. And as an engineer, I will tell you, this is the time to turn it back as quickly as possible, because I cannot even guarantee to you that you will survive, even if you start doing everything now. Okay, that's how dire the situation is. So anyway, assuming 1200 liters of water will kill the baby, in 4 minutes, the baby dies. The second animation, we're going to just focus on the burning machine and reduce it by 15 liters per minute. So when you do that, 150 liters is going to pour from the aerosols tank into the bathtub, and the baby dies in 1.4 minutes. So the baby dies faster. Why? Because you lost the cooling effect of burning fossil fuels when you do that. Okay? And this is what everybody wants to do. And you say, are these guys out of their minds? Because they haven't taken into account the opportunity benefit of fossil fuels, right? Now, when the baby is dying, you cannot go complain to Mother Nature, hey, you know, by convention, we never took into account the opportunity benefit or the opportunity cost, so don't kill the baby. No, she's going to kill the baby anyway. You can't complain to her. She's going to kill her because that's part of nature. The third animation is when, if you just focus on the killing machine and reduce it from 15 liters to 0 liters, it opens up the drain and 30 liters will pour out of the bathtub into the vegan reforestation tank. So you have 35 liters coming in, 30 liters going out. So the bathtub fills up at 5 liters per minute. And in 40 minutes, the baby still dies. So that's the 90% reduction that happens, okay, if we address the killing machine. That's 87% is what my estimate is showing. But the baby still dies, because as any plumber will tell you, if you have two faucets pouring water into a bathtub, you have to shut off both faucets if you want the baby to survive. And you cannot take the baby out because that represents all life on Earth. So you have no choice but to keep the baby there. So that's the fourth animation. And it shows you that if you focus, that if you do both, then the water level in the bathtub keeps coming down, and then you can turn off the burning machine faucet more and more and more, and eventually shut it off. So there is a way to save the baby and drain the bathtub, but we need to be quick about it. We don't have too much time. And I'm going to stop there and let Glenn take over. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Dr. Rao, for that presentation. I'm about to introduce Glenn in just a second, but I just want to comment on how that really paints that analogy with the baby in the bathtub. Really, it just kind of shows how our climate narrative is really misled big time. And it just kind of highlights our window of opportunity being really short. I appreciate that, Dr. Rao. Give me 1 second to put Glenn on the screen. Add spotlight. There we go. Alrighty. So our second guest speaker tonight is Mr. Glen Merzer. He is a playwright, screenwriter, and author who was educated in Indiana University and Boston University. He started his career in stand-up and wrote for network television for many years before he started to write books that advocated for a plant-based vegan diet. He co-authored a book back in 1998, Mad Cowboy, which highlights the accounts of highly dangerous practices of the cattle and dairy industries. And in 2020, he authored one of his latest books, Own Your Health, which includes over 75 delicious vegan recipes. And he's also the author of his latest book, Food is Climate, a response to Al Gore, Bill Gates, Paul Hawken, and the conventional narrative on climate change, which came out in August of this year. And I actually own one of his books right here, if you all can see it. It's a really great, insightful, and an intense read. And much like what I was saying with Dr. Salish Rao, it really does highlight the how we're misled in the whole climate narrative. So Glenn, thank you for joining tonight. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. I'm going to try a new PowerPoint I've just completed. Let's see if I can do it. There we go, I think. I'm clicking on it. There we go. And okay. Diet, culture, and our planet. Here's the problem. This, believe it or not, is the problem. And no, there's nothing wrong with breastfeeding, although there is a point at which we should all stop drinking milk, if you have any self-respect at all. And yet adults actually drink the milk of other species. That's true. Something they would never do if it involves suckling. But the problem that I'm trying to focus on here is that we naturally love our mothers who feed us, and our fathers, and our extended family. And we're usually fond of the town or the village that we grew up in, our friends and neighbors, who all share and perpetuate our culture. We embrace, we rarely break from the culture in which we are raised. We cherish it, we defend it, we protect it from attack. Therefore, if our culture is irrational or insane in any way, we won't see it, we won't object, we won't find anything wrong with it. And you can think of one example after another of cultural insanity. We all know of cultures that treat women as second-class citizens, of cultures that practice genital mutilation on girls. Ancient Greece was divided into free people and slaves, as was 16th to 19th century America. There's a culture that has the tradition of eating the brains of the dead. Another culture cremates their dead and consumes the ash in plantain soup. We've got the running of the bulls in Pamplona. And the next thing, believe it or not, this is true. Some babies in the 21st century are born into royalty as their ancestors have been for centuries. Yes, they're very special babies whose births make international headlines. That's really true. More cultural contributions to the world. Baby tossing has been in practice for at least 700 years. Babies are tossed from the top of a temple to men who catch them with a blanket. This brings good luck, apparently. It's illegal, but it goes on. Finger amputation is practiced as a form of atonement for one's sins. Self-flagellation is practiced for the same reason. Ritual killing, human sacrifice, has been around for as long as civilization. In America, healthy young men and women go to college, join fraternities and sororities, and every year since 1959, there's been at least one death, and usually more, from hazing. Yes, young people drink gallons of rum until they die of alcohol toxicity. 44 states have laws forbidding hazing, but it goes on because it's part of the cherished culture of the Greeks. This is an image from a vegetarian festival in Thailand. That's part of their culture. It looks insane, doesn't it? And this is part of our culture. These are pigs going to slaughter. And this is part of our culture. And this, and this, and this, 30, 40,000 chickens in a warehouse. They call that farming. This processing plant, this is part of our culture. Cows in a corral off to slaughter, chickens being processed. Now, if you think of it, isn't this at least as cruel and unnecessary as this? Do we slaughter animals because we need to? Now, we don't celebrate slaughterhouses the way that, for example, bullfighters have been celebrated, but we know they're there. We know that we depend on them for our food, and we accept all the cruelty involved because we believe we need to eat animals. And we believe we need to eat animals because everyone in our culture around us eats animals. Animal foods are advertised on television. Eating animals is normal. Mommy and daddy fed us animals, and mommy was always good to us. We love her. Excuses are made up to justify what our parents fed us, because after all, they loved us. They never would have harmed us. And so we want to believe these excuses. And so we're told that animal foods are good for us. The problem is we have 70 years worth of science that disproves the myth of health benefits. There's more evidence that consuming meat and cow milk are deadly than that smoking cigarettes is deadly. And that's a high bar. First study goes back to Ansel Keys in 1947. He studied businessmen in the Minneapolis area, and he identified saturated fats and cholesterols as key indicators of heart disease. It earned him the nickname Mr. Cholesterol. Then he went on to do the 7 countries study in 5 European countries, Japan, and the United States. Again, he identified serum cholesterol, blood pressure, diabetes, and smoking as universal risk factors for coronary heart disease. The Framingham Heart Study has been ongoing since 1948. What's that, 73 years? Study has found high blood pressure and high blood cholesterol to be major risk factors for cardiovascular disease. In all the years of the study, found no heart disease in patients with serum cholesterol under 150. Now, cholesterol is only found in animal foods. Study of vegetarians in 1975, and by the way, I could find about 5,000 of these studies, so I won't go on endlessly, but there's countless such studies. In this study of vegetarians, mean cholesterol levels were far better in the cholesterols in the meat eaters, 126 versus 184. The LDL bad cholesterol, 73 versus 118. Triglyceride, 59 versus 86. This is a study that's 46 years old. Dean Ornish's studies in which he's reversed heart disease. Now, he put his patients on a low-fat vegetarian diet with a little bit of low-fat dairy, which he shouldn't have done, the dairy part. But even with that, he found a 37% reduction in low-density LDL cholesterol, 91 reduction in the frequency of angina. Here's a study that Walter Willett was part of in 2012. All they did here, they didn't even have vegetarians here, they just lowered the amount of meat for 1 serving a day, and they found that they estimated that 9% of deaths in men and 7.5% in women could be prevented if they served even a half serving less of meat. Red meat consumption is associated with an increased risk of total mortality, coronary vascular disease, and cancer mortality. But the gold standard of studies, I'll tell you, all the other studies don't compare to this one, or actually 2 studies by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. And why are his studies superior to all the other studies? Because in Esselstyn's studies, they weren't just on vegetarians, they were on people eating a low-fat, healthy, whole foods, vegan diet. So we finally have 2 studies where people are eating properly. And he did his studies because he had the excellent diet that he was able to then feed to patients who were the sickest patients around. He got heart patients who were told by their doctors to make their final arrangements. And so from 85 to 97, he did a study on 24 heart patients who had had many heart attacks and cardiovascular events already. 18 of the 24 were compliant with the diet. No further cardiac events in the 12 years of the study with the compliant patients. These are patients on death's door, 12 years later, doing fine. The 6 non-compliant patients experienced multiple cardiac events and 1 death. He then did a study with 198 patients, heart patients. 44 had already had heart attacks, placed on a low-fat vegan diet, no oil, no nuts or avocados. Now, nuts and avocados are reasonably healthy foods, but if you're a heart patient who's already had a heart attack, you have to be strict. No sugary foods or fruit juices. So they ate whole grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruits. Exercise was encouraged, but not required. You didn't even have to exercise. 3.5-year study, 177 of 198 patients were compliant. Only one of those suffered a cardiac event. 104 out of 112 of them reported improvements in their angina, so they were reversing heart disease. But there were 21 non-compliant patients, and of those, 13 experienced cardiac events, and there were 2 deaths. So this is a dispositive study. This absolutely proves what the healthiest diet is. There's no way you could get numbers like this at random. Esselstyn's longevity, he's 88 and fit and healthy. Ansel Keys, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, he lived to 100. The Cleveland Clinic study in 2019 has discovered yet another reason why meat may be killing us, and it's a chemical called TMAO. And so people who eat a diet rich in red meat had tripled the levels of this chemical. The point here is just that we're not discovering any evidence contradicting what Ansel Keys discovered 70 years ago. We're just discovering new reasons why he was right. More and more reasons why meat causes death. And of course, I don't have time for all this, but there are other diseases related to animal food consumption: obesity, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune diseases, even osteoporosis. Yes, milk can bring on osteoporosis. So it goes on, and yet people think nutrition is a controversial subject. It isn't. The science is settled. The truth is that all serious scientific studies conclude that meat and dairy are detrimental to human health. It's not a conflict between science and science. It's a conflict between science and culture. So why don't we believe and act upon all the science, 70 years worth of science that tells us not to eat meat? We love our mommies, our culture. Our mommies fed us animal foods. Is there any case for meat? Because I know some people may be thinking, but I heard something about meat being good for you. Well, nobody made the case more consistently than Dr. Robert Atkins of the Atkins diet. He was overweight. He died at the age of 72, weighing 258 pounds. Pretty impressive for a multimillionaire author. His family refused to do an autopsy and claimed he slipped on ice. That was in New York City in April. And then there are the red meat papers. Some of you might have heard of this. About a year ago, it was announced, it was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, a study that recommended continued consumption of meat at current levels. How did they come up with this? Well, they didn't do a study at all. What they did was they did a meta-study of other studies, and they assigned a point system. This is really true. Now, I don't remember the exact numbers, but they looked, for example, at blood pressure. And they said, well, blood pressure is better in the vegans than in the meat eaters, so we'll give the vegans 1 point for that. They looked at longevity, and they said, well, longevity seems to be better in the vegans than the meat eaters, so that's 2 points. And they looked at cholesterol levels, and far better in the vegans than the meat eaters. They gave that 1.5 points. And then they looked at diabetes. Diabetes far better in the vegans than the meat eaters, so that's 0.5 point. And then they came up with their own category: ease of use. Ease of use. How easy is it to be a vegan versus how easy is it to be a meat eater? Well, it's much easier to be a meat eater. You go to the July 4th picnic, you have hamburgers. So they assigned points for ease of use. And they gave the meat eaters 43 points for that. So that's how they did that study. And it was published in a formerly respectable medical journal. Now, it was attacked by almost all serious scientists. It was attacked by the Harvard School of Health. The guy who led this red meat study had previously done a study proving that sugar isn't bad for you. And all his studies were paid for by the International Life Science Institute, which is an industry trade group supported by McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Cargill. So that's the other side. If you ever hear, gee, but nutrition is controversial, I've heard arguments on both sides. That's the other side. That's all they got. They got nothing. And so now we face a climate emergency. And we know that animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change, as Sailesh was talking about. 37% of the world's non-ice land surface is grazed. If even half of that is restored to forests, as Sailesh has proved in one of his papers, we can return carbon dioxide levels to pre-industrial levels. Methane with a global warming potential of 120, nitrous oxide with a global warming potential of 300, are the signature greenhouse gases of animal agriculture. This is a fire map that shows these are pasture maintenance fires. These are fires that are set every year by people who graze animals. Whatever the cows don't eat, they burn. We don't even measure how much carbon dioxide that brings into the atmosphere, but you can see that all these areas run up against the desert. And this desert, from the Sahara to the deserts of the Middle East, to the Thar Desert in India, to the Gobi Desert in China, these are largely human created. The Sahara was forested 10,000 years ago until agriculture was invented and people started grazing animals. So if what we've done to this part of the world we do to California and the Amazon, we're finished. So we're destroying life on the planet. Animal agriculture and/or industrial fishing are the leading causes of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, deforestation and desertification, ocean dead zones, biodiversity loss, and pandemics. And we could reverse this only one way, by a global transformation to a vegan diet. And there's only one thing stopping us. Can we grow up already? That's what we have to do. We have to break from our cultures in order to do this. With that, I'll stop, Alex.
Thank you so much, Glenn. As we've seen from both of our speakers tonight, there's definitely a lot of benefits when it comes to incorporating more plant-based meals, not only just with our environment, but also with our health and the welfare of other animals as well. And you made a point saying that, you know, our food is personal, it's cultural, it's ancestral. So it's hard for a lot of people to transition. So this actually opens up the panel for some questions that we may have for Dr. Rao and Glenn. Let me highlight the both of you together. And anyone who has any questions, please put it in the chat, or if you want, you can message me privately and then I can read them out loud in order. Spotlight. Oh, whoops. Second, let me just add you. Spotlight for Glenn. And then Salish, I'm going to spotlight you too. There you go.
Sure.
Salish, I'm proud to share the spotlight with you.
Same here, Glenn. Thank you. Did we make such a crystal clear case? So no questions?
Maybe having rebates for restaurants to go vegan, to go vegetarian, or for restaurants that go vegetarian. Here's one question that we have. Do you have any advice for a community-based organization like ours, like how to get the message out in a way that will get more people to act and in a way that can influence things at the systemic level?
Yeah, great question. You know, I wish I knew the key to this. I wish I had this one single key that we could use for every community. It's going to be different, and it's going to involve it's like the buckshot approach. We have to try lots of different things. We have to start giving away vegan food. We have to tell them how urgent it is. I use the analogy of my friend Ken Laker, who kept trying different diets, but he kept going backwards in his health until he went to one doctor who told him, Ken, looking at your numbers, you're going to die if you don't do what I tell you. Then he said, eat nothing except orange juice until next Tuesday, and then come back and see me. I'm going to do another blood test on you. And then a week later, he told him, okay, now you can drink orange juice and eat some spinach. So that's how he slowly built up his diet. And Ken, lost his weight, and he survived and he thrived. And he told me that doctor saved my life. We are facing the same situation as a species. Okay, we've been given this warning. I mean, this is serious stuff. We have triggered a whole bunch of nonlinear feedback effects in the climate, and the numbers don't look good. So that's all I can say. Now we have to figure out how are we going to tell our friends and neighbors that this is a very serious issue that we need to be addressing as quickly as possible. And how can we help you? I think that's the way it should be. How can we help you get over this?
Thank you, Dr. Rao. I've received one question in my private chat. How can we make plant-based diets more accessible to people who are low income or don't have access to grocery stores? Most of the time, plant-based alternatives are more expensive, and even fruits and vegetables are more expensive or harder to access.
Yeah, we have a documentary called They're Trying to Kill Us, which goes into this, which shows why it is like this. It's basically the colonial system, of oppression that's continuing. And I'd say that the best way to deal with that is for the community to come together and cook together. If you do that, then you can overcome these problems. Just figure out a way to get to Costco and buy things in bulk and cook together as a community. And so that's the one way to overcome the food desert question. And the other thing is for those of us who have choices to actually start feeding our neighbors. So this is why we have this thing called food healers. We are trying to cook up a stew with the excess food from supermarkets and then give it away to people.
I'll add that the food deserts are a scandal.
Yeah.
And the government subsidizes animal agriculture and makes meat cheaper than it should be, and it would be better if we were subsidizing organic growers of fruits and vegetables. But all the same, like canned beans could be $1 a can. There are a lot of foods that are inexpensive. Of course, we need to get more produce into the inner cities and into Native American reservations. But it's not fundamentally the case that vegan food is more expensive. Beans aren't expensive, lentils aren't expensive, rice isn't expensive. So you can eat a vegan diet that is not an expensive diet, but you do need access to healthy produce, and that's where we have to put a lot of emphasis as a country.
This opens up to another question that I'll read. What is the greatest plant-based source of protein? Chicken breast and egg whites are staples of my diet because they are so optimal in protein.
No, they're not. T. Colin Campbell wrote a book called The China Study, and that chicken protein and egg white protein is carcinogenic. So you want to have healthy protein, and the healthiest protein is from plants. Now, you don't need much protein. Remember that image of the baby being breastfed? Well, who needs protein more than a baby? And you know what percentage of protein that baby gets in the breast milk? 5% of the calories are protein. So you never need more than 5% of your calories as protein. You don't need more than a baby. You know what you do with the excess protein when you eat the egg whites, which are 100% protein, and the chicken breast, which is 50% protein? You know what you do with all that protein? You piss it out because the body can't store protein. So all you're doing is stressing your kidneys and bringing on osteoporosis. Protein is a myth. And when I say it's a myth, of course it exists, but the protein myth is that it's so important to keep getting protein. Well, why did the meat industry create this myth? They created this myth because they looked at their product and they said, well, there's no fiber in this product, so we can't say fiber is important. There's no vitamin C in this product, so let's not emphasize vitamin C. There's no antioxidants in this product, so we won't emphasize that. No anti-cancer effect. It's about 50% fat and 50% protein. It's going to be hard to make the case that saturated fat is healthy. Let's say that the protein is good. So that's what they do. They're trying to convince you that all this excessive protein does you some good. It does you no good at all. Look, I haven't had meat in 48 years. I'm fine. I've never taken a pharmaceutical drug in my life. I'm standing. I'm fine. I have no health problems. You don't need it. I know vegans who've been born vegan. They're fine. You don't need animal protein. And in fact, it's harmful.
Thank you for that, Glenn. We have some similar questions relating to protein. So I'm hoping that answers that question somewhat, but I can go back to them really quickly. I want to repeat someone else's question. If someone has food allergies from legumes to soy and cannot eat only vegan, is bison really one of the lowest footprint meats?
Is what one of the lowest?
Bison.
Bison. Silas, you take the bison question.
Well, bison, it's one of the endangered animals, that we are trying to bring them back. And it just pains me to see them being exploited like this. First of all, everything has protein. I had an argument with my colleagues and my classmates saying that broccoli has more protein than beef. And they were shocked. They said, what? How can that be true? But on a calorific basis, broccoli has more protein than beef. Okay. On a calorific basis, if you just eat rice and potatoes, you'll get all the protein that you will need. There's plenty of protein. This is why, there are gorillas eating just fruits and growing really, really big. Elephants eating just plants and growing really, really big because there's protein in plants, in every plant. Because protein is a building block of life, okay? So we have been conned into thinking that protein is only found in meat, and that's why you should keep eating meat, There's absolutely no need for it. And as Glenn pointed out, we are a species that needs the least amount of protein compared to any other species. I mean, our mother's milk has the least amount of protein compared to even rat's milk or any milk, right? Has more protein than mother's milk from a human mother. So I think we have been conned into thinking that we need to eat these animals because they are trying to create a system where they can sell their products more and more and more. And they have gotten into our textbooks. They're lying to us in our textbooks too. Is that bad?
We need to believe in science. I hope everybody listening here believes in science. And the science tells us that we evolved. I mean, there's all the fossil evidence. There's all kinds of evidence of our evolution. We know that we evolved. And we know that our cousins are the primates. So if you want to know what we should be eating, isn't the first thing you should do look at how we evolved? I mean, do you look more like a tiger or a chimpanzee? We have 97% of our DNA in common with chimpanzees. And they eat a diet that's about 95, 97% vegan. I tell the story about how it's true. Once or twice a year, a male chimpanzee will go into the trees, trap a monkey, kill it, and exchange the living flesh of the monkey to a female chimpanzee in exchange for sex, which is really, really terrible behavior. But they're not doing it for protein, they're doing it to get laid. So you give them a pass on that. You look at, gorillas, 99% vegan. You just look at our primate cousins. We are herbivores. You look at every aspect, they call it comparative anatomy, every aspect of our anatomy compared to the anatomy of mammalian carnivores, mammalian omnivores, and mammalian herbivores. We're talking about the length of the intestines, the saliva, the acidity of the stomach. Do we have claws or do we have fingers adapted for the piano? And in every aspect, we are herbivores. We are piano-playing herbivores. And we are not carnivores. We don't have a single characteristic of carnivores. We just have, McDonald's and all these companies trying to feed us this nonsense.
We have time for just a couple more questions that I'll ask, but before we mark the end of the meeting. But Glenn and Salish have kindly offered to stay for a few minutes after 8 in case any of you have to go, and to ask any more questions, to answer more questions for those of you who would like to hear from them. So one question is, what about olive oil? Someone said oil is not good.
That's true. What we call free oils, the olive contains olive oil. So if you think there's something good about olive oil, eat the olive. But once you put it through turn it into a processed food and remove the oil from the olive, you then have a product that is 100% fat with no fiber. So if you think there's something special about olive oil, eat the olive. You can get all the fats you need from some nuts, some seeds, some olives, some avocado. But once you process it and you turn it into free oils, it's not good for your health. And it's particularly not good if it's heated. So if you're going to have some olive oil, you're better off having it just cold on your food, not heated up.
Here's one last question before I mark the end of the meeting. This one's for Dr. Rao. Can you go into more detail about the opportunity benefit of fossil fuels and aerosols? It seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, there's a paper by Jim Hansen, and he called it the Faustian bargain of fossil fuels. It's a deal with the devil. Because when we burn fossil fuels, coal and oil especially, not only do they pump CO2 into the atmosphere, they also pump sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, SO2, which is an aerosol, which cools. So every molecule that we put into the atmosphere either cools or heats the climate. It has to do one or the other. Okay. Some molecules which happen to have radiation profile in the visible region, they will cool the atmosphere. And if they're in the infrared region, they will heat the atmosphere. So that's how it works. And so CO2 happens to be a heating gas, whereas sulfur dioxide happens to be a cooling gas. And the amount of sulfur dioxide we're putting into the atmosphere every year, every few weeks actually, is enough to mask about 1/3 of the heating from the carbon dioxide we put into the atmosphere. So that's what he calls the Faustian bargain of fossil fuels. It's a deal with the devil that we made. Because as soon as we stop burning, it's going to kill us. So this is why we have to keep burning it. But I'm saying actually you can shut down the killing machine and start sucking down the CO2, and then you can start turning down the fossil fuel engine, because that allows you. So that's an engineering approach that we need to be taking, right? So we have 2 levers at our disposal, not just one.
Thank you, Salish. Before we step into our post-meeting Q&A, I just want to say for those of you who have to leave right now, thank you so much for coming. And really, Thank you to our guest speakers. If you're considering incorporating more plant-based foods, or maybe even going vegan, it's as easy as just a Google search away. And as we've discussed, there's the environmental benefits, the health benefits, and benefits of our animal welfare. So this marks the our hour mark, but just for those of you who still want to get your questions answered, please stick around for maybe about 10 minutes or so, and then we could try to get through all the rest of the questions. Salish, this one is for you. I believe it's with regards to your book. What's the occupation of butterflies?
It was about the transformation from the caterpillar to the butterfly. And butterfly undoes the damage that the caterpillar did. So there is a phase that the caterpillar goes through where it's munching and eating leaves and vegetation. And then the butterfly goes and pollinates flowers and regenerates life. So I am claiming that we are going through the same transformation from our caterpillar stage, where we were basically consuming the earth and essentially heating it up. And now we are being called to transform to become butterflies, where we will be regenerating life and healing the climate and maintaining it. And that's the only way out for us.
Here's another question. What are your thoughts on lab-based meats? Today, The Economist had an article on scalability and pushing these food of the future. Is this more greenwashing or a possible solution to our cultural crutch?
What do you say, Sailesh?
Yeah, I have a quote on the website, cleanmeat-hoax.com. So you can see that I'm on the other side of this. But basically, it first of all starts off by saying that people can never give this up. And therefore, they're going to have to eat bad food because they can never give it up. Okay. And then it claims that it can create meat more efficiently than nature can with technology. So the technology requires a whole bunch of fossil fuels, to run the factories, to create a clean environment, to make everyone wear bunny suits and go in to work on these things. I mean, literally, you all have to be, it has to be completely sterile environment. Otherwise, you're going to get pathogens in there. You're going to get more antibiotic resistance. And you will have more pandemic type things happening because there will be contamination. And I know that. I used to run silicon chips, right? I used to create silicon chips. So we had to have environments like this, but there were times when you had to throw the entire batch out because it got contaminated. Right.
Let me add that to me, I spoke earlier about cultural insanity. This is another kind of insanity in which we're just trying somehow to keep eating animals, even if we clone them somehow. Cargill now, the agro giant, is creating masks to put on cows. I'm not making this up. Masks to put on cows to try to trap the methane. I mean, just any kind of way. They know the earth is dying. They know it's killing us. And they're going to somehow try to keep this animal agriculture going. Why don't we just do the healthy thing and eat sweet potatoes and rice and beans and soy and broccoli? Why do we have to try to clone a cow in a lab? It just seems crazy to me. I want to add that for those who are transitioning to a plant-based diet, in my book, Food is Climate, I'll plug it here now, there are 65 recipes that are in there to try to help people make this transition. And I recommend watching the YouTube channel of Chef AJ, who this week, every day this week, is interviewing chefs who have recipes in my book. AJ is great at hosting her show and bringing on doctors and and nutritionists who can answer a lot of these questions and do cooking demonstrations, but it's easy. Basically, if you could boil water, you can make rice and you can make millet and you can make buckwheat and you can make oatmeal. And these are the basis of meals, whole grains. And then you add vegetables and you snack on fruits and you're good and it works and you don't get sick. Everyone I know who eats a low-fat, plant-based diet is healthy.
And with that, we will end the meeting with these last two questions. The first one, very often vegan food sold commercially in restaurants, food trucks, etc., is fried and has a high sodium content and is highly processed, usually to make it look or taste like animal. Shouldn't we encourage people to eat fruits, veggies, and grains closer to how they exist in nature, which is how they are most delicious?
That's a yes. That's easy.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But we are so addicted to the extra sugar, the extra salt, because they have been working on this with psychologists to figure out how to get us addicted. Okay. Because they know it is sugar, oil, salt, okay, that we crave for. And so we are stuck in that mode. But if we start eating healthy, after a while, that becomes tasty, that becomes delicious. And you will discover that this salt, extra salt, actually is disgusting.
I saw something in the chat here that I didn't know. They are attempting to use lights to zap methane. Did you hear about this one, Sailesh?
Yeah, there are all kinds of things they're doing, and seaweed feed, yeah.
Seaweed I had heard of. I didn't know lights to zap methane. Is Jordan here? Can he tell us how that?
Yeah, I just saw the article today when I was at work. Some Norwegian company has found a way to stop livestock slurry by releasing methane by zapping it with lights.
All right. It's either that or we can stop eating meat. So you get the light zapping or the stopping eating meat. That's your choice.
I heard that Burger King, I believe it's Burger King, said that they're trying to feed their cows lemongrass because that is supposed to produce less methane as well. So that's another thing to add to that list.
Yeah, apparently they had to withdraw that ad because that wasn't true. Some scientists said that doesn't work.
This will be our last question for the night. Question for the both of you. In your personal opinion, why do people become so passionate to defend the animal agriculture industry and eating meat and consuming milk?
I feel like I addressed that in my PowerPoint. I think it's the culture. People defend their culture, and they don't, it's cognitive dissonance. They don't want to feel that they have been participants in a cruel and unnecessary industry.
Yeah, it's also the fear of the loss of the known. It's not the fear of the unknown, it's the fear of the loss of the known. You know that you have a certain position in society, you're doing well, you think you may have to compromise that, something changes drastically. So people are clinging to these things, right? I'm a billionaire, I don't want to ever give up my billionaire status, whatever that is, right? And so they cling to it and then they perpetuate this. And it just becomes part of the culture, the game that we are playing. And I say, ultimately, it's all colonialism, right? So when people say, I'm going to destroy forests for another 9 years, well, that's colonialism. And I think the era of colonialism is over. We are done with it, okay? No more. So we need to put an end to this.
Agreed. And with that, those are all the questions that we have for the evening. Thank you so much, Glenn, Salish, for joining our event tonight. I really appreciate having you. I look forward to seeing what else the both of you do after this and looking at more of your presentations as well. With that, we will end the evening. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Alex.
so much. It was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That was fun.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic.
That too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please
Yes,
read
thank you
Foolish
both
Climate.
so much. Thank you.
Yes.